Fantastic. And I will watch as we get more people to join, as more of the people who registered pop in. First off, I want to say thank you to everyone who's here this evening and everyone who's watching this in the future. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the event coordinator for Left Bank Books in St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm so happy to be able to moderate this panel on demystifying publishing. I have, today is my 14-year anniversary of working at Left Bank Books. It is technically longer, but it is my full-time anniversary. So having worked at a bookstore for so long, I still have so many questions about what everyone does behind the scenes in publishing. We are joined today by a couple of authors as well. So we do have a behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, kind of full picture of what it's like to be in the process of a book. But let's go ahead and go around, and I'll have my panelists, this is our panel. I will have the panelists introduce themselves and what they do at Dutton. And let's start with Alexis.
Hi, I'm Alexis Castellanos. I'm a senior designer for Berkeley ACE. My team at large covers PPG. So within that, there's also Dutton, but I'm primarily working on the Berkeley and ACE titles, but there is some cross-pollination.
Lauren.
Hi, my name is Lauren Morrow. I'm a publicity manager at Dutton Plume and Tiny Reparations Books, and I'll get a little bit more into what that means, but essentially I work to publicize all of our various authors within those imprints through media, meaning newspapers, magazines, radio, podcast, you name it on that front. And I've been here for about 3 years now. And I will pass it over to Stephanie Cooper.
Thank you, Lauren. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Cooper. I'm the Associate Publisher and Director of Marketing at Dutton Plume and Tiny Reparations Books. I've been here a little longer than Lauren, only 6 years, but been working in publishing for almost 2 decades. So definitely have a love for this industry and have a love for publishing books that people want to discuss and that get conversations started. I don't know, is this the moment when we say where we came up from? Or you're going to ask that in a minute? I don't know how far deep to get into it. I will pass it over to Erika.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erika Semprun. I'm the social media manager here at Dutton Plume and Tiny Reparations Books. So I work very closely with the marketing team to promote our books, especially across digital platforms. So that includes Instagram, TikTok, X, Facebook. And I also work sometimes on title-specific campaigns. So just kind of helping the title marketers on the social media side, whether that's with like ads or just like ideating and brainstorming ideas. But that's kind of like a very quick overview of what I do. And I'll pass it over to Cassidy.
Thanks, Erika, and hi, everyone. My name's Cassidy Sachs. I'm a senior editor on the Dutton team. I'm going on 9 years at Dutton, so that makes me the longest tenure here, which is something that happened almost without me noticing. I publish a broad range of books. The Dutton imprint is all adult, but I do nonfiction from pop culture all the way to quite academic nonfiction, and then fiction covering a huge spread of genres, from women's fiction, very lighthearted books, all the way to more upmarket historical books or books with a little bit of magic in them. So lots of different types of books on my list.
All right. And for anyone who's joining us that doesn't have a background in publishing, let's now start to get a little bit deeper. So I want to ask you what your title means, what your job looks like day to day, and also incorporated into that as how you came into the role, the specific role that you're in right now.
Should we go in the same order, or?
Yeah, I'll start because I didn't give nearly as much information about myself as everyone went on to. But as I said, I'm a senior designer specifically on the ad promo team. I've been here for going on 4 years next month. And this is just my second job in publishing. I got my first job in publishing in 2016. My role was marketing designer at Bloomsbury, which is like a mid-tier publisher in New York. And I had to leave that job in 2018 because my now husband graduated from grad school and we didn't want to stay in New York City because it's expensive. And back then, remote work didn't really exist in publishing. It was like you have to be in New York City to stay working in publishing. So we moved to Seattle. I had to give up working in publishing for a few years. I worked at this like ad agency, and then COVID is what opened up the opportunity again for me to work in publishing, which was very exciting. So in 2021, I got the job, this position, and I've been fully remote now in LA, and it's been wonderful. It's been a great team. For our team in particular, because we're doing advertising and promo, digital design, some print design, working remote works well for what we do. There's really not a lot of hindrance there. And yeah, so I've been working in publishing for almost 10 years.
And in terms of my journey, I grew up in St. Louis, studying dance at COCA, which is not so far from Left Bank Books. And I studied English and dance in college. And when I graduated, I sort of wanted to merge the two. And so I worked in performing arts publicity for a long time before I was in book publishing. I was at BAM, Brooklyn Academy of Music in Brooklyn, and then I was at Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater for many years in the PR departments at both places. And then I went and got my MFA in creative writing, which we may get to a little bit later, sort of being on both sides of things. But when I was returning to New York after graduating from the MFA program, I knew that I was ready to shift away from performing arts and that I was interested still in utilizing the publicity skills that I'd learned over the past decade. And, you know, after so much time immersed in books, publishing felt like the right place for me. And so I was very lucky to have landed at Dutton Plume and Tiny Reparations Books. And here I get to sort of merge my publicity skills that I sort of honed over the years in my early career and my love for books. And so much of what I do now involves making sure that the general public knows about our books via the media. So as I mentioned before, contacting editors and producers and writers and freelancers and podcasters at different magazines and newspapers and online publications and radio shows to make sure our books are on their radar and hopefully that they're interviewing our authors or reviewing our books, that sort of thing. So focusing really on more traditional media, not social media, that often gets confused, particularly when I'm talking to younger people. So that's sort of what I've been doing for the past 3 years here, and it's been really fun.
I can jump in next. So my role as associate publisher has kind of just started in a more formal way this past spring. And that isn't a role that a lot of people understand, maybe. But basically, it means I keep the trains running. So that means scheduling titles each season. You don't think about it, but titles only come out on Tuesdays, and there are only so many Tuesdays in the year, and there are only so many Tuesdays within a season within the year. So we don't want our big books that are competing against each other to come out on the same dates. We also might have issues with author schedule conflicts or, media blackout moments where, a big show that we want to get on isn't going to be on that time. So we really try to be very thoughtful from a very early point about where we slot in each of our books. I also liaise really closely with our sales, inventory, and production teams. And basically, that means that we make sure our books not only look incredible, but also that they are sort of sold into as many channels as possible for readers to find them. And then I work really closely with our publisher on special projects. We do analysis of market trends. We do analysis of, where do we have, what categories are we missing books in that are maybe trending in the marketplace? Or where do we have too much that we might need to spread it out a little bit more? And so we're really looking at a high level across our full list and how to develop it in a meaningful way that, we think will hit its stride in the marketplace. And then on top of that, I'm also the marketing director. So I lead a team of 5, including Erika. And most of the people on my team are title marketers. So I, help them sort of strategize plans with authors. That is more on the paid promotion side. So Lauren mentioned how publicity really has earned media. So roundups, review coverage, appearances on TV programs or in podcasts. But on our side, we're mostly doing paid promotions. So that's advertising, largely digital advertising, but that landscape changes all the time. So we're constantly sort of analyzing what's working in real time, seeing what's happening across the whole Penguin ad landscape and across titles that might be similar to ours, and really just making sure that we're putting the right amount of ad money into the right places for the particular book that we're trying to get out into the market. We also handle VIP outreach. So if an author has wonderful contacts and connections, we want to get early finished books into those hands before most people can get them, so they can help us spread the word. Influencer and brand partnerships, which I work closely with Erika on a lot of those. So yeah, it's a real mixed bag. I think the thing I like most about marketing and why I was sort of drawn to it, out of all of the departments you can work in publishing, is that it's a really central hub for so many different parts of the industry. I don't think there's one department that we don't have to be in touch with at some point. And that felt really meaningful to me, but it also felt exciting. No day is the same. Every day can be a little wild. It can be a little, you know, frenetic in terms of like the energy, but I think there's always something really satisfying about knowing that you play such a central role in the success of a book.
I can go next. I'll talk a little bit about my journey, and then I'll kind of go into my role a little bit the way that Stephanie did. But my journey was pretty similar to Alexis's. So I actually started in publishing back in 2017. I'm originally from Miami. I'm currently in Salt Lake. But in Miami, there isn't a big book scene other than like Books and Books and the Miami Book Fair. So at the time, I had kind of been doing my research while I was in college. And I found this small like children's / educational publisher, and I kind of like begged them to let me be their marketing intern. And so I did that for about a year to 2 years. I went from intern to assistant, and then in 2019 I did an internship over at Hachette. That was only for about a summer. And then similar to Alexis, I didn't really like New York enough to stay. And so even though I loved the industry and I loved the role, I didn't really want to kind of like pivot my whole life. So I went back to Miami, and I was working there at an agency for a few years in social media. So I worked with like influencers and a lot of different industries. So like food and beverage, hotels, automotive, and a few big brands, just to kind of work through their strategy, their content calendars, partnerships, and like everything you can kind of think of that goes into working at a social media agency. And then finally, like Alexis also said, COVID really kind of changed the landscape of publishing. So in around 2022, I had kind of started to hear that remote was becoming an option. And I found this role through one of my now teammates, Isabel, who her and I had kind of kept contact through the years, and she told me about this role that was opening. And I applied and I interviewed with Stephanie, and here I am. So I've been working here for almost 3 years in January, and it's been really, really fun. This role actually didn't exist before I joined the team. Well, it did in publishing, just like not at Dutton. And so I've really enjoyed my journey of kind of like making it my own. So when I kind of joined the team, Stephanie and I had like a few discussions of like what we wanted the role to look like and how that could like evolve over time. So when I first started, I was actually helping a lot with title marketing, like I had mentioned a little bit earlier. So I would kind of help the title marketers kind of ideate and brainstorms campaigns for their specific titles. I would also work on our social media channels. So like, again, X, Instagram, TikTok, all the stuff. And TikTok was a big part of my role when I first started. But through the years, I've kind of shifted more into like a brand social strategy person on the team. And so I'm not working on title marketing as much anymore. I'm kind of doing consulting where I will kind of help the team overall if we have like a big title where they want to get a little bit more creative with the campaigns or we want to really think outside the box. I'll come in on that campaign and kind of help on the social side there. But in general, I kind of really work on the branding and really growing and expanding our social presence online on the Dutton and Tiny website. So that includes a lot of different things. I work on the newsletter, which isn't necessarily social, but there is actually quite a big connection on there because it is kind of an online audience. I work a lot on like influencer and just in general partnerships with other kinds of partners. So I'll do outreach to like creators that we want to work with for giveaways, other imprints that we want to work with across publishing. That kind of stuff. And then this year we're actually celebrating the 5th anniversary of Tiny Rep. So it's been really fun because I've been able to get really creative. We're doing a few mailings for it. We're also working with a few other partners like Little Free Library. We've been working with like indie bookstores. And so my role has played a really big part in kind of like coordinating all of those campaigns. And yeah, that's kind of an overview.
And I will bring things home from the editorial side of things. I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, so Midwestern-ish and a world away from book publishing. And despite having been just a ravenous reader my whole life and have books meant so much to me through my childhood, the way that they mean so much, I think probably to the people on this call. They taught me empathy and connection, and just they were such a huge positive force in my life. That when the time came finally to start thinking about careers near the end of college, I had the perfect conversation with the perfect advisor who raised the idea that book publishing could be a good fit for my interests. I had the good luck. So my university was in DC. I got an internship with a literary agency that was based in DC. Erika, similarly, I basically begged them to let me be their intern for the year, and learned so much on the job. There are no agents on this call. So if anybody has questions about the agent side of things, I can offer a little bit of insight there. And when the time came when I was graduating, Dutton was hiring an editorial assistant. To give you a little bit of an idea of what the editorial ladder looks like, it's a really interesting setup for a career. It's a real apprenticeship model for learning a job. Unlike so many industries, it's not like there's a class of assistants that are hired at the same time. There's one assistant hired for one boss at a time. And that relationship is a really close one. You really learn the ropes from that one person. And so a typical path through is you're hired as an editorial assistant, and then you become an assistant editor, an associate editor, an editor, a senior editor, an executive editor. And then you can spend an entire career at executive editor. The roles just change subtly, not massively. The responsibilities are pretty much the same for anyone on that ladder. So I think of my job being broken into 3 different parts. Everyone always wants to know whether I spend all day reading. That is some of my job. But it really starts one step before that with networking. So book editors are one side of this relationship, agents are the other. My job is to know the agents that are selling great books, and make sure that they know exactly what I'm looking for. An agent represents an author directly. When they have a client that's writing in a space that I buy books in, I want them to think of me first and foremost, so that I have the chance to read and consider books that might be of interest to me in Dutton. Then that's the second piece. It's receiving submissions and reading them, considering whether they might be a good fit for my list and for Dutton's list. That's that moment where I actually do get to read with a cup of tea on the couch and with the fireplace going. Like, that does happen every once in a while. And then the last piece is actually publishing the books. I think of this as the most important part of my job. It's being the author's champion in-house. PRH publishes tens of thousands of books a year. Being the person who is speaking on the author's behalf to all of our different departments to make sure that the story is top of everyone's list, everyone's favorite book to talk about. That takes a lot of careful attention, lots of enthusiasm. That's the most fun part of the job for sure. I work on about 8 to 10 books a year. So you can imagine that at any time, books are in different parts of the process. So it is, like Stephanie said, a job that changes every single day. But I know that we all feel really privileged to do it.
All right, thank you so much. I am going to go a little off script because I realize that time is going very quickly tonight. But you all brought up a lot of things that I wanted to talk about and some follow-up questions. So first off, I'm going to ask, how many books are you working on at any given time? And are you reading all of the books?
I can go first. So technically I don't really work on like any of the books, but I also help work on a lot of the books. So my role is kind of very different to, I would say, Lauren, Cassidy's, or Stephanie's, but maybe a little bit more like Alexis, to where I kind of get to have like a bigger scope of the books, and I get to like dabble in like a few different books, let's say, but I'm not necessarily like assigned to any specifically. And I don't read all of the books, but I do read a good amount, I would say. Yeah, I think that's my answer.
I couldn't give you a number, frankly. I work on quite a few books, and not only Berkeley Ace books, but as I mentioned, my team covers Putnam, Dutton, Tiny Rep, Penguin Press, Plume, and then Berkeley Ace. I think that's everyone. So sometimes I work on titles from those imprints, but the majority of my work is within Berkeley Ace. But there are some titles that I know are lead titles that I'm going to be producing a lot of stuff for. And that's where I'm working a little bit closer with the marketer to come up with ideas. And that's a case where I'm like, okay, I'm going to read this book so that I am bringing something, like, I'm bringing something to the table with this. So every season, there's like maybe 2 books that I read out of my full list of books. But yeah, I couldn't give you a solid number. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's so tricky to give an exact number because at any given point in the year, I'm working on books that are coming out right now. I'm inevitably doing something for a book that came out a few months ago. I'm reading and writing press releases for books that come out far in the future. And so it's difficult to say. On average, I probably work on, I mean, some months I'm working on 2 books. I've had months where I'm working on 3 books. I've had months where I'm working on no books. After having, 3 books in a row in October, nothing in November, for example. So it really varies. But as Cassidy was saying, at any given point, books are at a different stage, and therefore we are at a different stage with our process. So, I'm sometimes still setting up events for authors whose books came out a little while ago, or coordinating interviews for those authors. And also, looking far into our spring season and even into summer, doing reading and early research and drafting press materials and getting things ready for that. So it's hard to put a number on it, but a lot. A lot
I
of
can put a finer point on mine because of the nature of the job. I publish, like I said, about 8 to 10 books a year. Something that's really helpful though, so it doesn't feel totally scattered across an entire year where every book is at a different part of the process. We think of our annual list in 3 seasons. So we group deadlines together for spring books, summer books, and fall books to help us stay organized. So even though, like Lauren has said, it might be that I'm working on a first level edit for one book and thinking about the cover for another book and talking about the sales presentation for another book, those deadlines are kind of grouped together based on when we're going to be publishing. So 8 to 10 a year, meaning maybe 3 to 4 a season. And that's just a way that we stay organized.
Yeah, I think that's helpful framing, Cassidy, because that is sort of what I have to be the heavy on in terms of making sure all of the deadlines are met by all of the editors. Obviously, Cassidy is only one of many editors on the Dutton Plume and Tiny Reparations team. So it's really important that, if we're going to a sales meeting for the whole season and we're presenting all of the jackets and the plans and the strategy, we really feel like we're ready for that across the board. We can't have missing jackets. We can't have missing manuscripts, especially for fiction titles. That's really critical. But to give you a scope of what our full list is like, we publish about 60 books a year, half nonfiction and half fiction. So that then is divided into those 3 seasons, like Cassidy was mentioning. And then between those 3 seasons, it's divided by all of the title marketers on my team, all of the publicists on Lauren's team. And I think I probably work on 3 to 4 major campaigns per season, and that's shifting a little bit as my role as associate publisher has landed. But my team might be working on 5 or 6 books per season.
I want to go back to Alexis and Erika specifically, but the team as a whole, since we are based in St. Louis and some of the publishing kind of students might be in attendance or might be watching in the future. I'm curious what the landscape is right now for those remote jobs. And is it still as easy to access those remote jobs and to begin your path into publishing fully remote from anywhere in the country? Or is it really something that it is easier still to kind of get into while working in New York City?
I can jump in here. So I guess it is a little bit easier to break into it if you are based in New York, because there are a bit more opportunities. But I do feel like the landscape has changed so much that it is like completely possible and doable to break into the industry being fully remote. So Penguin Random House, for example, offers fully remote internships. And internships are really a great way to get your foot in the door. We've had about 2 to 3 interns in the past year and a half, because we have them by season, and none of them have been based in New York. They've all actually been based. I think we had one in Georgia, one might have been in Chicago, and I can't remember.
Texas, and
Yes.
Maryland.
Yes. And so they've all kind of been scattered and not necessarily in the Northeast, which I think is really helpful, because I like having that fresh perspective of someone who maybe doesn't have that very hardcore perspective of living in New York or living in the Northeast. And so having team members that kind of are located all over, I found really helpful, and is really grateful also for campaigns and all of that kind of stuff. So I definitely do think it's doable, especially through internships. But Penguin Random House specifically does have a lot of roles that are full-time that are now being open to remote, or even like a hybrid. I will say that PRH is one of the more like lenient ones. There are other houses that are a lot more strict when it comes to being based in New York, but I do think that PRH is really open when it comes to remote work.
Yeah, I would say pre-pandemic, like it's definitely a lot easier to get a job in publishing outside of New York. But there has been that shift that now people are going into the office more regularly, and these companies are paying rent for offices that they want to get used, that it's kind of like shifted a little bit back towards that more difficult range. PRH is definitely one that I think has one of the most lenient programs in terms of remote work. It just depends on what you're interested in, honestly. For me, for what I do specifically, it is not a common role in publishing. It is few and far. Not every imprint has an ad promo design team or even just like one designer. So if you're looking for a position like mine, it's much more limited. And that would be a case where it'll probably be easier getting a job in New York City, because there's still publishers that have switched to either, if it's not New York City only, it's like the tri-state area. So you have to be like within the region, not necessarily just New York City. So if you have one of those like more specialized interests, I think it is a little bit more challenging doing remote. But for some positions, remote is more possible. Again, for like, I feel like publicity, I hear that's one where people like to have in-office employees, especially because they do mailings and you are in office putting those things together. But it depends on the team and it depends on the publisher. But there are certain positions.
Yeah, I was going to say we do have one colleague who just moved full-time to California, but for the most part, our team, the publicity team, is primarily based in New York, because we do have some instances. For example, on Thursday, I'm going to be doing some TV interviews with authors, so I'll be taking them around to different television programs, and I'll be with them in person for that. But it is not the case across the board, and we do have someone who's based in California, which will be helpful when we have someone in her area, because when that happens, we often can't be there. So
Yeah, so it's a
it's a
mixed
little
bag.
more unusual, but yeah, it's a mixed bag. I'll also note that sales reps, we have sales reps all over the country, as I'm sure you know, Shane, who work with bookstores, and they're really wonderful. And it's nice that we have people in different regions all over the country to share our books with all the incredible booksellers across the country.
One of our Penguin sales reps was in today, actually popped in from Chicago just to say hi.
Oh, that's so nice.
Cassidy, you talked about the ladder, and I'm wondering if that ladder exists in some form among the departments where there are internal education systems that can really help people learn other aspects of other people's jobs and become better at the job that they may have started out doing for the company.
So I wouldn't say, and somebody jump in if I'm missing something, that there are formal interdepartmental exchanges to support that kind of growth across the departments. But what I will say is that it's a company that's very good at disseminating information, at bringing our groups together. So we're talking to each other a lot. I get to observe the marketers doing their jobs and the publicists doing their jobs and ad promo. Like, I get to see people doing their good work every day. It's a super collaborative place. So there's a lot of hands-on learning that happens. I will say that as you get deeper and deeper into those different ladders, it would be a pretty major shift, though the early level jobs, so I mentioned editorial assistant, assistant editor, those jobs still have that apprenticeship piece. You're still assisting a single or maybe two editors. That same structure applies across marketing and publicity. a marketing assistant might assist a marketer or a marketing department, and ditto for the publicity side of things. It's possible, I think, to make that jump between departments at a more junior level where the job description probably shares a lot of things, supporting the team, doing a bit more on the admin side of things. Once you've specialized and gotten up the ladder into a specific department, um, it would just be a harder shift. It would probably mean dropping back a little bit in your career, to use the old like metaphor of like moving down on the rock wall in order to find the path up. I think some people have done it, but it's probably a little bit less likely. And as far as I know, there is no internal education systems to help an editor become a publicist.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, the other thing I was just remembering if there were examples of people who have made the shift. And I think mid-level, like manager level, if you were coming from like marketing or publicity or sales, I think that's an easier rotation to make in terms of there's a lot of shared DNA with what skill sets you're building, knowing the books, and there are some people who I've seen move either from sales into a marketing manager role with an imprint, or the reverse, moving from a marketing or publicity position into a sales role. Um, I think it could be hard. Yeah, I think it could be done in any way, but I think if you were really eager to make a shift, you would have to do a lot of internal networking and be really committed to finding mentors in the department that you were wanting to go into. I think that would be my recommendation.
Lauren, I am really curious what your experience has been as a newly published author. Big blurb. Uh, Congratulations.
Thank
So
you.
I'm curious what it has been like for you to watch the publishing process from interacting with people and jobs that you have not experienced in your term as publisher or working for a publisher as you are now doing for as an author.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to be on both sides of it. And, part of what I think can be so scary for a debut author is the fact that you've never done this before. And so much of the work that happens on a publishing team happens behind the scenes. Like you're not seeing everything that happens. We, meaning, the people on this call, when we have marketing and publicity meetings, we go through everything in detail. We share a marketing and publicity plan. We're in touch with the author, but there's so much work that's always happening that they're not necessarily privy to because, I don't necessarily need to tell my author every time I send a pitch out. They would be very annoyed with me if I did that. And so knowing that has been really helpful for me, knowing that even if I'm not hearing from someone, especially a couple of months out from pub, when authors start to get a little bit more anxious and they're anticipating things and eager to know what's going to come, and we're still waiting for those answers on the back end. I think that was helpful for me to understand as an author. In the months leading up to pub, I was like honestly pretty laid back because I knew things were happening even though I wasn't constantly hearing from my team. And then all of a sudden one day, you get your Kirkus review and you get your publisher's weekly review and the things start to roll in and get exciting. And so I really appreciated knowing the way that the system works and trusting the process. And of course, we try our best to communicate that to our authors, but I think inevitably, particularly when it's your first time, it's really scary and you want to, know every single detail of what's happening. So I feel very grateful that I have had a very clear understanding from the beginning of what this looks like. And of course, there are things about the process that, because I'm a publicist, I've never been involved in the copy editing process. So that was brand new to me. And going through that process was not something that it went exactly as I had expected. The timeline was much quicker than I anticipated. minutia was really fascinating, and I was so grateful for all of the work that my copywriter did. And it was something that, you know, all of my authors go through, and I just am not a part of that process. So it's been really fascinating to be on both sides, and I'm grateful for all that I know. I feel like I've felt pretty calm throughout the process. There have been, you know, moments of intense excitement, of course, particularly during Pub Week, but I also feel like the things that don't happen are fine. I understand that, like, you know, everyone wants XYZ with the publishing process. And if you get X and Y and not Z, that's incredible. I think there's so many books that are being published, and I've just been grateful for everything that's come along. And also, I completely understand that when I'm pitching a book, I don't necessarily get everything for my authors that I think they deserve, because the landscape is really busy and really full. And, you know, for one reason or another, something just might happen. Maybe the Times doesn't want a reviewer, doesn't have a reviewer to cover this particular book, or, you know, it seems like it would be perfect for Fresh Air, and yet, you know, you don't book the interview. And sometimes it does happen, and that's incredible. But I think having been on this side of things, on the publishing side of things, I am very grateful for everything, and especially grateful to have an understanding of how things go and how much work goes into the process, and sort of trusting my team to take the reins, and also understanding how much work goes into self-promoting as an author, because that's a big part of it too, and being very shameless on my social media.
I'm gonna cut in because I also had a book published last week. But for you, it must be interesting. I don't work directly with authors. Like I'm like there's someone else dealing with the author. I'm in my own little silo, just designing things. So it must be interesting, like being an author and communicating directly with authors. Because like my thing, having worked in publishing this long, as an author, you can't hurt my feelings. Like I know what to expect. I've set my expectations low, and I know what to make a stink about in terms of being an author. Like I know what's actually a problem and
Right.
what's
And
just
what
like
doesn't
something,
matter.
what's going to hurt my feelings
Right.
more than anything. And since I'm not really communicating with authors that much, mostly I'm only communicating with authors as an author myself, like at events and stuff. And so I at least try to be a resource for other people, of like talking them through like, oh, this thing happened. And like for authors, a lot of time publishing can be really opaque, and decisions are made that seem like random, like there's no sense behind them, when like there is, like there was a whole team that made that decision, but as an author sometimes it's hard to see it. So being able to communicate with like other authors and be like, oh, you know, like that's a good thing that they did that, you know. But for my day-to-day job, I don't think it's necessarily affected how I work in publishing, other than like I'm trying to think, but like I really don't think I bring in my experience, as it's usually the other way around. Where as an author, I'm speaking to other authors, but never like in my position does it frame how I work, just because my work is so separate from anyone else. I'm just like doing little designs and sending them off. But yeah, it is an interesting, it gives you perspective on how like authors see things that we're sending in, because it's a confusing industry. Like you send over a TI sheet and you're like, what is this? So yeah.
I think I have time for maybe one more question, but I want to encourage our attendees that are here tonight with us. We will have time for some of your questions. So I'm going to ask one question, and then we're going to open it up to the three of you watching right with us right now. But I'm curious what your advice would be if you could go back in time and looking at yourself as you began your career in publishing. What advice would you give yourself? And also, would you encourage people who are young and college age That could be literally any age at this point. But would you encourage them to maybe seek a more traditional publishing emphasis in a university setting?
That's a good question. I don't know that I would do anything differently, actually. I've really enjoyed my journey coming here because I really think that kind of starting in publishing and then shifting that a little bit to agency life made me a lot better at the role that I currently have, because it gave me a very unique perspective into like how marketing could work across different industries and not necessarily when it comes to books. And so I don't think there's like a right or wrong way to break into the industry or to work in publishing. I think it could be a bit easier if you start a little bit younger. Like if you start as an assistant, it probably would be easier to continue to like climb the ladder, I guess, or like be promoted into like other roles. But I still do think that it is very possible to kind of join publishing at a mid-level position and grow from there. And if I had to kind of give other people advice, I would say to go with whatever like feels the best. I think if you don't feel like you want to be like an editorial assistant, maybe you're like interested in working in like a media setting or for like a literary agency, and that's right for you right now, you could totally use those skills in the future if you want to shift into publishing.
I agree, Erica. I don't think it's necessary to start at the bottom of any of these ladders. The skills that you need to be a successful early or junior level person in publishing, you can get from any array of early job experience. You can be a sales associate at a busy store. You could be a tutor that spends a lot of time like working with somebody to like develop ideas and to teach them things. You could be an office assistant, a job that just requires a lot of organization and polished communication. I think that if I were looking for an assistant or a new joiner, those experiences would be just as valuable. The thing that you can't replace is love of books. So if you're thinking about it, just start now. I'm sure you already started. Just read everything. Read everything in the categories that you love. Try out new categories. Just introduce yourself to author so that when the time comes to do whatever your job is in publishing across our many different like functions and the functions that aren't here, you can speak with intelligence and passion about different types of books and different types of authors. That sort of experience takes a long time to build up compared to the on-the-job training that is relatively, you can learn how to do the role of an editor in just one conversation. You can understand what the function is, but you can't replace that contact with books.
I would say I had a different experience trying to break into this industry because I have a BFA in theater design and technology, and I had been working as a scenic artist painting sets in New York City for a few years when I decided to try to break into publishing, and it was very difficult. I was doing everything to try to get my resume in front of the right people. I was like sitting down doing informational interviews. And I was told like to my face once by a literary agent, because I was also applying for agency internships. I was told by a literary agent that no one would take me seriously because of my theater degree, which is crazy because it's like an English degree, but you learn a lot of practical skills. Like I don't, but he was like, yeah, people in publishing. And this was like, 2016. I think a lot has changed in the industry, but I do think like the old guard, so to speak, does have this expectation of what someone who works in this industry is like. And I face that like over and over again, like, oh, you don't have any office job experience. Like I don't, think these people would be comfortable having you work here. Like I was looking at temp jobs in publishing and no one was letting me in. I finally got an internship with a literary agency that was amazing. It taught me the lingo, but what really got me a job was paying money to do the Columbia publishing course, which is a 6-week course at Columbia that when I did, it was like $6,000. I think it's even more expensive now. NYU has a similar course. The Denver Institute has a similar course. And it's basically like, if you have the money, this gets your foot in the door. It gives you like something respectable on your resume. It gives you really great networking opportunities. There's a job fair at the end. Like that's what guaranteed me work. But without putting in that money, I wasn't getting anywhere. Like maybe with that unpaid internship, they don't do that anymore, but back then they were all unpaid. It was really, really hard to break in. They wanted to see someone with, if not like a traditional background, something that wasn't so, and I was applying for design jobs too, you know, but a job that was like so creative. I don't know, something about a theater degree really turned off so many HR people. And that's the issue, is you have to get through HR first, which is like a really broad spectrum that they're looking for. As opposed to like once you get in front of the editor or the designer and they know specifically what they want, I think that's the challenge, is you're trying to get past HR first. So it has improved, I think, especially like I know my supervisor definitely looks for people with non-traditional backgrounds because you bring interesting perspectives into the team. I think it's really important. But in my experience, it was very difficult breaking into this industry with a non-traditional background.
I also have a theater degree, and I encourage other stores all the time that if they're looking for an event manager, event coordinator, to hire someone with a theater degree, because they not only know when it is their turn to speak, but they also are incredibly organized and can like make things happen without like getting any sort of notice about it whatsoever. And that is a very critical role in a lot of things. So I love a theater degree.
And I'll just sort of piggyback off of that as someone who came from the performing arts and popped over to publishing mid-career. I don't think I would have done anything differently. I'm so happy that I sort of built my skill set in the performing arts and had that experience. And also, as Cassie was saying, have always had this obsession with books and have always, you know, kept my eye on the books lists that we keep, like all of these roundups and reviews that I'm now working on pushing out into the world. I was eating those up for my entire adult life. And so it felt like a natural transition. And I think I once applied for a job when I was still at Alien Publishing and, you know, didn't get, like you're saying, Alexis, through like the HR filter. And I was like, I've got all the qualifications. I just have never worked in this industry. And I think perhaps by the time I finished my MFA program, two things happened. The industry was sort of opening up a little bit more and being a little bit more expansive in how they were looking at candidates. And also, I'd had the MFA experience and had really been steeped in books for two and a half years at that point, two to 3 years. And also, I think the biggest thing is that I knew someone who'd been an editor at one point who knew another person who could just say, here's an application that perhaps you should look out for, or like flag for HR. I think that probably was incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Oh, I was just gonna say, I think networking was huge, and that's part of the reason why I'm here, because of my colleague being like, hey, this opened. But also something that I've heard a lot from HR, because we are a few of us on this call are on the mentorship committee. So something they say a lot is that cover letters are extremely important, because maybe your resume won't necessarily say that you had an internship or that you had a very like traditional role that someone in publishing might be looking for. But that's kind of where your cover letter really lets you shine. So kind of explaining that you are passionate about books and being really familiar with the imprint, I think is really important. Like, I think people are looking for the person that they're hiring to have some kind of knowledge on at least like one of the authors that has been published, or like a love for the genre. So if you're like applying to a nonfiction imprint that really publishes like memoirs or like self-help, that kind of stuff, kind of sharing the books by that imprint that they've published that you're passionate about, and really sharing why you specifically would make sense for the role versus someone who could have those qualifications but maybe doesn't have the understanding of the titles that they publish the way that you do. And so I think like that's why the cover letter is so important and really can make a difference in the hiring process.
I agree. I think that's the number one thing that might be a misstep in some of the applicants that we've seen. I feel like in the last 2 to 3 years, I had a lot of hiring to make in our department. Not only Erica, but 2 other colleagues were also hired very close together. And during that hiring process, we were definitely getting resumes, not just from NYU publishing programs, although Alexis, to your point, Columbia, NYU, those were like the Denver Publishing Institute. Those used to be pretty much some of the only candidates that you would see for roles. But the things that have stood out for the candidates that I hired and also the people who we've hired for internships have been cover letters and proof of passion for this specific imprint. And it's not that hard to do the research. We publicize everything we do on our social channels. It's really a 5-second thing. But hopefully there's a connection with a book that you've read or an author who you see that we publish and you really love. And we want it to be genuine and authentic, but it is kind of a great lead-in to make sure that it is the right passionate fit for yourself as the candidate and for the team that would be hiring.
Oh, you're muted.
Silly, silly me. I want to open it up to audience questions. So if you would like to unmute and ask a question, or if you want to type your question into the chat, feel free to do that. And but I want to take this time to really thank everyone for being here, for sharing your knowledge. I have so many more questions than I came in expecting to ask. I could talk to you all for hours. This is just so fascinating. So thank you all so much for participating.
Us too, Shane. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us. And thank you, Lauren, for coordinating.
I do have to say, I think this calls a little bit of proof of like publishing is a really small world. I think that's an important thing to know too, because you always, everyone knows everyone in this industry. And you said Isabel was the person that told you about this job. I did CPC with Isabel. So like it really is,
She's a great networker.
She is.
She's so good.
People move around a lot. Like they change imprints, they change publishing houses. So it's a small world when it comes to networking and publishing. And once you're in, everyone knows everyone at some point.
I was gonna jump in with a question. My name is Miliana. I'm also at Left Bank. As a bookseller, I really appreciate a couple of things. Your guys' transparency. I think a lot of friends of mine who are writers and creatives and booksellers who are interested in publishing have kind of run up against that wall of like, if you're not based in New York, or if you don't know anybody, or if you haven't been through those publishing courses, I think sometimes it can feel like there's this impenetrable wall there. So it's helpful to hear both that that's not imaginary, and also that there are ways that publishers are trying to consciously open those doors a little bit more, and certainly people who are working within publishing houses like you all. And that was kind of my question, was the split that you're seeing between people coming with traditional publishing experience or not, but also kind of, and this might be role dependent, but people coming with role specific experience versus book experience, right? As a bookseller, I think I've encountered a lot of people who have been in bookselling who are interested and kind of see bookselling as a step to publishing. And I'm curious if you guys are seeing that on your end, as opposed to maybe publicity roles, people who have experience in that, or Stephanie, people who have experience in project management, but of something in an entirely different industry. Do you see that step from booksellers into roles in publishing a lot? I'm kind of curious what you guys are seeing on your end.
I can say there's an example of someone who's the head of our sales team right now who was a bookseller. And that was his role. He was a Borders bookseller, so that dates when he was doing that job in New Mexico. And he often talks about that as sort of the like springboard for what made him want to get into book publishing. That might have also helped him network a little bit and get his foot in the door. And I know that he did end up moving to New York City. This was well before COVID times, but he has come up and is now the head of our sales team. So that's an example of someone who definitely started as a bookseller and is, you know, proud of that, obviously. And it makes a lot of sense for him to now be in a sales role. The other thing I was going to say is I think there's definitely an appetite for wanting people with strong project management skills. I will say that and a love of books is probably the perfect matchup for who would make a great fit, at least on the marketing side. I'm sure in many other departments as well, because it is very project based. There's tight deadlines. There's a lot to juggle. You have to constantly reprioritize and you have to get buy-in from all of these different departments. Like marketing is such a central hub. While I have to get sign off from the art team and the production team and the sales team and the author team, and you know, you have to make it all come together. So I think both of those things would be great in my mind in terms of you know, the ability to be a strong candidate.
Another thing to keep in mind is that even though it can feel like publishing is very New York centric, there are book opportunities everywhere. You can be a bookseller, there are indie publishers, there are agencies all over the country. And so if you want to work for PRH, maybe like we've been saying, it feels like there are some hybrid roles, some fully remote roles, but our business really is an ideas business. It's a people business. And so many functions, we just do our jobs better when we have access to each other. But that if you see yourself as an editor, if you see yourself, you know, as again, some of these roles that kind of require the hands-on and face-to-face contact, that you don't, there are so many different places that you could work in publishing and do the same exact jobs that we're talking about here. So keeping an open mind about what it means to work in publishing, I think could also be helpful if geography is a big constraint or a big consideration for you.
Do we have any other audience questions?
I'll jump in again. Just kind of a silly one, maybe as we get close to the end, but I'm curious if you all feel like you get to read outside of your roles. Shane kind of asked, how many books are you working with at a time? But in terms of your own pleasure reading, does that kind of get, sometimes as booksellers, like, you know, it can get into busy season. Shane knows we're in September and October in the thick of it. And that's the thing that gets pushed to the side, unfortunately. I'm curious if in your roles, reading has changed personally for you.
That's a
I'm
really good
lucky.
question.
I
Go ahead.
can read during my job. I listen to audiobooks all day at 2x speed because I can. Like I'm not in that many meetings and I'm just designing. So it's like a very just like I'm zeroed in and I have my book on. So I get a lot of reading done. I don't necessarily have as much time for physical reading as I would like. But thankfully for the specific work that I do, I just listen to books all day, which is really nice.
I'm laughing because this weekend, fall is busy submission time for us editors. So this weekend I spent pretty much 2 10-hour days on the couch reading. And both nights I got into bed at the end and like picked up my for fun book and like started reading again. And both nights my husband was like, "What are you doing? How could you possibly want to read for fun tonight?" So yes, we definitely still read a lot outside of work.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I still read pretty consistently outside of work, and I also listen to a lot of audiobooks.
I think too, it also informs your work, right? Like in terms of the books that we want to acquire, in terms of the books that are working really well in the industry, we would love to have all of the books that are working in the industry be ours, but they aren't. And there are categories that are working really well that sort of surprise people and rise to the top of the charts. And I think it makes a lot of sense to read those books. So I always try to carve out, often I want to read them, but I also try to carve out time to read like competitive titles because I feel like it just informs your work and sort of the scope through which you're looking at new acquisitions.
All right. I have one question that I'm going to send us off with, and I think it's a fun one. Might just be fun for me. I don't know. But a famous celebrity is spotted with one of your books in a paparazzi photo. How chaotic does your life become?
If it's Taylor Swift or Beyonce, extremely chaotic, but I think amazing because I think I would be able to convince our legal team to help to let me use the photo across our social channels, which for people who don't really have like a lot of background on social, we don't often get to use like celebrities or like movie posters or like TV shows in our work because of like copyright infringement and that kind of stuff. So I feel like in this scenario, that would be like the best case scenario, and I would love that.
Yeah, my immediate thought was amplify on social. Get people talking.
All right. I know we are a little bit over time, so I want to be respectful of everyone. It was such a pleasure to meet all of you, Lauren. I look forward to meeting you in person in November. And hopefully I get to meet all of you at some point soon. I think that would be lovely. It's been really incredible for you to answer these questions, to give us a glimpse into demystifying publishing. I think you fully succeeded in, at least in my eyes, answering a lot of the questions and taking away a lot of the mystery, a lot of the shroud that can seem to surround publishing for a lot of people. So I want to thank the people who were with us tonight, both panelists and the attendees, and I want to thank anyone who watches this in the future. It's really been a fantastically fun evening for me, so thank you.
Thanks
Thank
again for
you.
having
Thank you
us.
for hosting.
Shane.